So getting ready for this test, the debate about what type of smoker to compare the Camp Chef Woodwind to as a pellet grill with enhanced smoke capabilities, I honestly spent the most amount of time trying to pick which one would lead to the most interesting and revealing results on whether or not the promises that Camp Chef have about this being a great smoker could really be appreciated in a taste test. So one of the things I considered is, do I put it up against something like my master built, 1050? The pros of this is they're both Wi-Fi smart controlled grills. They both have apps, and we both have the ability to use wood and supplement that with another fuel source, whether it be pellets or charcoal. But I've recently done my master built 1050 running just a wood fire, and it came dangerously close to some of those entry-level offset cooks with way less effort. So since I know that's already starting to encroach into offset category, that has me thinking, well, why not look at an offset? So we could do something like an offset smoker. The problem with the term offset smoker is there are so many different types with wildly different smoke profiles and characteristics. And so not all offsets are created equal. This is something I learned firsthand over my last year of having 4 different sizes and a couple different brands, is the term offset does not mean the exact same result. So if I come to this one, for example, I don't think it would be a fair comparison to go to my Smoke North Huron for a couple reasons. One, cost. You could have 3 Woodwinds for the cost of the starting price of one of these. So that's not really something I think many people will be cross shopping. So the budget, I think, would hold this back. And 2, this is the cream of the crop for offset smoke flavor. This is getting as close as what you're gonna get to jumping up to a 500 to 1,000 gallon offset, but it fits in my backyard. I can build a nice fire with a couple logs, maintain a low flame, 275 for an hour. I have to interact with it the least out of any other offset that I own, and the smoke quality is at the absolute top. So for price, and just knowing that this is as good as it gets for offset smoke flavor, I'm not sure that this would be the best one to pick. So I have a better one in mind that I think is actually a little bit more relevant in terms of some of the choices that you might be making at this price point, as well as smoke quality. Let me introduce it to you. So the smoker that I've chosen for today's comparison is none other than the Oklahoma Joes Highland offset smoker. So this is what I call my cheap offset smoker. I bought it last year to test a couple of things versus premium offsets to see if you can get the same result without spending an arm and a leg. Because half the time, 50-50, you can actually get a very similar result without forking over the big pile of cash. And that is something that I wanted to test with the Oklahoma Joes. And like always with these inexpensive offset smokers or any other grill, I've fallen in love with it over the past year, but I am about to be selling it as one of the other ones. This is time to clear out Backyard Island and make way for spring weather, which is right around the corner. But when you have something like the Oklahoma Joes, I think there's going to be a fork in the road. So there's either people that are coming from something like an Oklahoma Joes and have said, this is just too much for me in terms of fire management, I don't want to be putting in all the work. Or they're looking at jumping into an offset and wonder, do I really want to step up to the offset and the interactions with the fire every 15-20 minutes or so, or do I want to get something like the Camp Chef Woodwind and potentially get a similar, if not equally good as a result, for way less effort? So this is the question that I think is most interesting given out of all the other options. The only one I didn't talk about is behind me there is something like the Kamado Joe. Now this is a manual Kamado Joe, but if I put a temperature chart up here, this is the most stable style Kamado I've ever used. I can hold flat lines, so it's not plugged in, but it might as well be, as it can spit out a really even temperature. And so I'm not sure even temperature, if that's going to be the most interesting. And I've done tons of comparisons trying to get my Kamado Joe similar to an offset result. And in particular with this one, I did a test with my cheap Acorn Kamado versus my cheap offset, and they were very comparable. I'm not saying that's comparable in the same sense of what I get on my larger offsets or my larger Big Joe, but in this price point and smoke profile, I think this is going to be the most interesting head-to-head. So without further ado, let's fire up our 2 pits. So speaking of setup, let's quickly talk wood, because this is one of the most controversial topics on any video that I've done with my Oklahoma Joes Highland offset smoker. There is 2 camps that have 2 differing ethos around how this offset should run. One camp is you use your grates, add a charcoal grate, or use the included grates, create a bit of a V, and add some charcoal to maintain your coal bed, get good airflow, and then add smoking wood for flavor. I've tested this versus how I'm going to set up versus my sort of real offsets or larger offsets versus my Kamado Joe or any other combination of everything I have in the backyard, and this is just not the best possible result. I encourage you, if you haven't tried it, try it. I think you're going to find the exact same thing. The trade-off, though, of what I'm about to propose is just like an offset where we use wood for fuel and wood for flavor, in a small backyard offset like something like this where we're 30 gallons, the interactions with the fire are going to be far more frequently. So we're going to be interacting with this about every 15 to 20 minutes, whereas on the Camp Chef, we're going to be about every 40-45 minutes in terms of adding a wood split. Speaking of splits, you see I have a prepared bag of splits. This is for two reasons. Normally I would break my 12-inch splits down in half using my miter saw, but doing that for a previous video, the miter saw caught a split and it kicked up and nearly took me out, and it broke the blade guard on my miter saw. So not only was that terrifying, I don't even want to touch my miter saw. So I bought the same wood that I would normally use, but instead of 12-inch size, it's down to 6-inch size. This is the pizza blend from the same farm. It's all hardwoods, but 6 inches in size. And some of these, looking in the bag, are still too large. We're going to have to get our axe and break these down in half yet again. And that is one of the very real and practical choices, if you're considering these two pits, is fire management, the type of wood that you buy, how large it is, and how much work you have to do in order to prepare it for your smoker. All we need for our Camp Chef is being able to fit it inside the smoke box. It's not, it's not like my offset where I can just throw an entire log in there. But other than just finding an appropriate size split, that's all we have to do for the Camp Chef. You can even buy wood chunks that are that size, or use charcoal or pellets or anything like that. But with the Oklahoma Joes, you do face this choice of, do I want to go charcoal for heat and add wood for flavor? And I have plenty of other grills that do that, so it's just not interesting to me. Or do I want to go wood for heat and wood for flavor and get closer to a real offset experience? And I think that is best foot forward for the Oklahoma Joes. That's what we're going to go with today. Let's grab our axe, break down a couple splits, fire it up. I'm going to build a little bit of a campfire style fire, use my Grill Blazer grill gun, and in this early stage, I just want to heat soak everything, including the semi-insulated firebox that I built using fire bricks. I want to make sure I get some heat into the stack so that it properly starts to draw. So we are going to get our Oklahoma Joes going first, then we'll add some pellets and fire up our Camp Chef Woodwind. Okay, that grill gun's got our fire going, but as you can see, not that we'll be burning a fire this big. This is just to heat soak everything, but it's a good way to see what's actually happening with the flames where they are drafting into our cook chamber. And so one of the things that I like to do, if I just move my cooking grates down over here to show you so I can drop down to this lower level, is to add a water pan right down on the bottom. Take a fast forward while I drop this in. And I've pushed that right against the firebox. So that means the fire, when it does settle down, it's going to hit our water pan, but I'm going to start to temper some of these gases so we're just not getting too hot, too fast moving gases. We actually want to get this smoke into the right temperature range for the best results. So that's why I've placed it right here. It's not only going to act like a bit of a heat shield when we have our rack of ribs, it's going to help temper those hot offset gases coming off of our fire, even though right now it's burning much hotter than what we'll actually be cooking at. Let's close this up, let it heat soak and start to die down, and now we can go add our pellets. Open up our hopper, add in some more hardwood pellets, about a half bag. Set our temp to 270. Okay, this is also the spot where we want to load our smoke right when we are getting the grill lit, because we're going to open up that bottom baffle, let the flames fly up and start to burn this wood, so this will turn into a coal bed, so we'll have no problem adding more wood splits in the future. So I fully loaded that up. Let's slide it in. And now we'll open our smoke baffle. Okay, we're gonna get our ribs ready. I'm gonna keep things pretty simple so that we can really focus on the smoke flavor. If I were to go for a whole bunch of things that I know turn out an amazing rib, like dry brine, different binders, making our own rub, different sauces, glazes, simple syrups, you name it, that's just going to potentially make it more difficult to appreciate the difference of wood. So we're going to keep things to the bare minimum. And since a bunch of the store-bought rubs that I bought are clumping up, and I'm going to lose these to becoming concrete very soon, I'm going to just use this to get rid of what I have. So let's get this out of the package, pat it dry. I'm not going to remove the membrane. I've done a couple head-to-heads and I don't find that makes any difference. If anything, it sort of helps seal off the bottom, retain a little bit more moisture so they're a little bit more juicy. So we're get them out, pat them dry, add our mustard binder, add our rub, and by then hopefully our 2 pits are up to temperature. I'll take you fast forward while I get to work on getting these out of the package. Despite being called a rub, we actually don't rub it in. We just give that a quick pat, press that down, make sure it adheres. Let's finish our presentation side now. I always do bone side down first, since that's not going to get messed up with us handling our ribs. These look good. Let's go check our pits. Okay, both smokers are now up to temperature. I've set the smoke drawer to close since now I have some glowing embers inside of my smoke chamber. So let's get our ribs on. I'm gonna put these on the second rack. In part why I've gone for the temperature of 270 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm gonna get just a little bit cooler up top here. So let's close that up. Also give me a little bit more separation from any radiant heat coming up. Let's get our ribs on our offset. So we are just dropping down slightly below 250. So it's about time, I think, to add some more wood. Let me show you that process. And again, I'm gonna go right here in the center. Now we have a little bit more real estate. If we wanted to add some more racks, we could definitely get a couple going north to south, but I'm gonna go sort of east-west to get some of that smoke rolling over. Plus, you can't see it here, but I've installed an intake lowering kit. I used to do this with a dryer vent. Totally fine for the temperatures I was getting because, again, it's only 390 degrees Fahrenheit that you have to worry about any sort of zinc toxicity. But to help make sure that this is forever safe and a good option, I've bought this extra intake lowering kit. And so what that's going to do is, if you imagine a bit of a rainbow arc, that's how the smoke is going to roll. So we're coming up over our firebox, up top, and then the draw intake is down here. So this creates about a nice even heat bubble in the middle. So if I were to go more racks of ribs, I wouldn't want to go over here. I'd like to stay in this middle sweet spot. Let's check on our fire. So speaking of modifications, the other modification that I've done is this semi-insulated firebox. And this allows me to take splits and place them up top here so that they start to warm up. So now that we've got some good flames rolling, let's add another split on top here. And I'm gonna see if I can slide one more split in on top of our others. You won't quite be able to see, but there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 splits in there now warming up. And because we've preheated them, you can see that it's combusted immediately. So I can close this, as well as put our bottom draft door to about a finger's width open. Okay, we have both racks of ribs on, and I should mention 2 things. So I've set our smoke intensity to 10 to get the maximum smoke output to really compare that. If I wanted to go mild, I know we could absolutely do that for something like chicken or poultry, but since this is ribs and I want to compare to an offset, I want to give it the full beans and go 10 out of 10. I should also mention, in my unboxing and first cook video, I ran into a small hitch with a software update that locked me out of being able to use any of the remote Wi-Fi features of the grill. I tried for about 2 hours. I was starting to run out of daylight and had to just move into manual. But I should mention, I placed a support call to Camp Chef in all of 9 minutes. That issue is now resolved. And so if you find yourself in this issue, the steps that they walked me through: unpair it from my phone, so go into Bluetooth, remove the device, delete the app, re-download the app, reboot the grill, and then start everything over. And the second time, it picked everything up exactly as you'd want. And so now I'm able to remotely go in and set the smoke level, change the temperature, and do all those wonderful things that you should be able to do in a Wi-Fi connected grill. So want to mention that, good customer support, and it took about 9 minutes to resolve that issue. So the game plan for today's cook now is to let these two hang out and continue to add wood as needed. I think, we're gonna be about every 45 minutes or so, I'll update you in terms of when I need to add wood. If I let that wood burn out and I lose my coal bed, I'm gonna have to reopen the smoke drawer in order to get it to combust again. But once I have a coal bed and continue to maintain that, I think we should be fine every 45 minutes or so. And our Oklahoma Joes will need wood every about 20 minutes or so, based on sort of these 1/2-inch size, 6-inch size splits. So I'll rejoin you a little bit later on with an update. Anything else I'm gonna do is just gonna be adding a little bit of spritz after about an hour mark to make sure things don't dry out. Rejoin you much later on in the day with any updates and a taste test. All right, our ribs are just coming down in the last little bit of the rest, and we are ready to dive in for our taste test. But while we wait just a couple minutes, let me fill you in on how the cook went. Well, no surprise, when you sign up for an offset, you sign up for an offset experience, which is adding wood every 15 to 20 minutes. Even using the slightly larger splits, which is really just the 12-inch split broken down in half, the longest that I could extend this is about 30 minutes. The Woodwind, every time that I checked it at 30 minutes, that was a little bit too soon, so I could stretch it to about 45 minutes before adding a fresh piece of smoking wood. And I also started to notice some temperature variability. So I added a tracking probe to each cooking grid just so I could get a sense of what the average temperature was that I was holding in each grill. I already know from tracking with the Woodwind that it's going to hold a flat line no matter sort of where I set it. I was more interested in, am I in the right range in the offset? Because when you add fresh wood, you get a bit of a spike, and when that starts to burn down towards the 15, 20, 30-minute mark, you go all the way from a high maybe of 300 to a low of 200, and that's sort of your ebb and flow of offset cooking. I know from my fire management video where I compared 30, 60, 85, 110 gallons, the variability on something like my small Oklahoma Joes is the highest out of any of the 4 offsets that I've owned. On my largest 110 gallon, you get close to a flat line, but again, this is sort of in a price range outside of today's experiment. So again, if you're comparing these two, that's very much part of the game with an offset, and particularly a smaller offset like the Oklahoma Joes, where we're going to get a little bit more fluctuation in our temperatures. Perhaps because of the temperature fluctuation, or perhaps because of the different heat properties. What I mean heat properties, 30-second crash course, all grills have the same 3 heat signatures, just in different levels of strength. So we've got our conduction air, that's hot air moving over our food. Offset has a ton of this. Then we have conduction air energy, which is the food sitting on a hot surface and it transfers that energy to it. I have a little bit more of that in something like my Kamado Joe or pizza oven. And then we have our radiant heat. I have a lot of that in my Kamado Joe or pizza oven, where they store a bunch of energy and retain the energy for a long time. We get some cooking. All of that to say, whether it's the proximity to the fire on the Camp Chef, the heat deflector plate radiating a little bit more heat, our ribs were done at least an hour in advance on the Camp Chef versus the offset. It just took a little bit longer. Couldn't achieve the same temperature. So one of the advantages of something like the Camp Chef Woodwind is I could dial the app down to 150 degrees Fahrenheit, stop cooking, turn it into a hot hold oven, and so our Camp Chef ribs have rested for a little bit longer. To try and make sure that that's not the decider, I did let the offset ribs rest as well to try and get them at the exact same temperature, but the Woodwind ribs have rested a wee bit longer than our offset ribs. Looking at them, haven't gone in for our taste test yet, but there's definitely, I think, a color advantage to the Woodwind. We've got a little bit more of a mahogany color, whereas on our offset, we've got a bit more of that Texas style looking bark, almost starting to get into brisket territory. But that's just how it looks. Let's dive in and see how it actually tastes. While I'm gloving up here, I'll mention the fuel consumption. So I used that bag that I had of wood splits, the entire bag in our Oklahoma Joe. So I'll put up, I don't remember the exact cost and I don't want to misquote you, but I burned an entire bag. I used 1 or 2 of the splits to give the Woodwind a couple of the chunks, but that was only 2 pieces. And so in terms of the Woodwind, I used almost all the pellets that we added, plus the hot hold rest. So that was nearly a half bag. So for fuel consumption and cost, I'll put the numbers up on the screen so we can understand what that looks like. I will say that buying your wood in these pre-packaged bags is a lot more expensive than finding a local farm. I just like to do that for consistency between tests, especially if you're switching different offsets that you don't get a new variable from different fuel. And I've been really happy with that, even though I know that this increased the cost of getting these ribs to where we have them today. So let's get a couple out here. Grab my Dow Strong slicer. Let's carve out a couple bones. These are the Woodwind ribs first. Nice looking smoke ring. Juice you can see there. As soon as I don't want to squeeze all that out, but I just give that a little bit of a touch. Got lots of juice. Pretty happy with that. Those look good. Do the same thing here with our offset ribs. So comparatively, I'm going to say a fair bit more smoke ring as you might expect, again, we're just burning a ton of wood. So visually that looks good. Similar, again, I don't want to squeeze it all out, but with the slightest press, we've got lots of juices in there. So at this point, I mean, if you have a preference of color, I would say those look a little bit better to me on the outside, but on the inside, I think the offset ribs from a smoke ring perspective definitely look a little bit better. So right now, that's kind of a tie. Give the Woodwind the outside, give the offset the smoke ring on the inside, but let's actually dive in and see how they taste. All right, moment of truth. Let's start with our Woodwind rib. Perfect texture, bite through, good bark. Let me go in for a bit more of the taste. That rib is delicious. We didn't add anything extra, and sometimes, you know, ribs and barbecue recipes can get carried away. Just a little bit of basic ingredient. That rub is mostly salt, pepper, garlic with a little bit of cayenne pepper. If you were to try and recreate it at your own, those are the main ingredients that your tongue can appreciate. It is really good. In terms of smoke, I had a hard time picking up a lot of smoke. Now I do appreciate that I'm standing out here in the smoke. My clothes are saturated. So while I brush my teeth and rinse my mouth and try and clear the passages, you as the pitmaster standing out, you're always going to have a lower smoke profile radar than your guests. It's kind of like when you went to visit grandma's house when you were a kid. You walk in and are all of a sudden blasted with the overwhelming scent of perfume, and grandma seems all too unaware of how strong that scent is. So true can be standing near your smoke and what your guests are. And so a great way to dial in your smoke profile is to save some food the next day in the refrigerator and try it, because now that your palate's clean, you get a better sense of how well you've actually smoked it. So for smoke here, I'd say it's good, it's clean, it's mild. Like, it wasn't the first thing I noticed. I had to go sort of digging a couple bites in before I could start to appreciate it. Let's see if I can tell any difference. Same situation with our offset ribs. Cheers. Once again, perfect bite through, perfect tenderness. These are two well-cooked racks of ribs. I'm gonna get a bit more of a taste. Okay, wow. So there is going to be a lot to unpack here. Some are obvious tasting them, and some are not so obvious. So let's get into a little bit of each. Starting with the obvious question, does the Camp Chef Woodwind Pro smoke a rib that is good as an offset? No, I'm sorry, it doesn't. It's not identical. Tasting these two side by side, anybody who tells you that it's the same is not eating them side by side or doesn't know what they're doing with their offset. That's possible, and that's maybe a whole nother benefit to look at the Camp Chef, is it takes some of that guesswork of fire management out of it. But there's also a difference in terms of how the smoke is hitting my palate. So starting with the Camp Chef Woodwind, I'm going to use the analogy of smoke here is like a seasoning, where you sprinkle a little bit of salt onto your steak and you sear it up and you eat it, and you get just a bit of salt, but then as you get deeper into your bite, there's no salt there. If you contrast that to a dry brined steak where you salt it and then put it in the refrigerator overnight, it's not more salty, but the salt is more perceptible. The seasoning, the enhancement that it makes to the protein or whatever you're cooking is all the way through. And this is what offsets do with smoke. And some people may be surprised. It's not necessarily more smoky. You can actually get more smoke if you wanted, not necessarily good smoke, but you get more smoke off of your Kamado Joe, you get more smoke off of a whole bunch of different things, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's better smoke. What the offset secret sauce is good smoke, but that fully penetrates. And the dry brine analogy is the best that I can do. When I was eating the Camp Chef rib, I had to sort of go hunting, especially once I got past the bark, to be able to notice the smoke, whereas it was like a warm hug of smoke with the Oklahoma Joes. Just greets me all the way through. So if I was to give these a bit of a rating, using 10 as my best ever rib, I'm going to give the Oklahoma Joes an 8.5. So it's not up there with my absolute best. It's best foot forward for this grill with the limitations. The mods have gone a long way, running a real wood fire, using wood for heat, using wood for flavor. I'm going to give that an 8.5. It's up there, but I've done slightly better. But it was a really good rib. If I move over to the Camp Chef, especially compared to what we just did side by side today, I need to back off to about a 6.5. It's not side by side comparable for smoke. And this is very true. What the Woodwind is doing here is adding some wood for smoke. It's kind of the same idea of a couple years ago when I started adding wood chunks to my Kamado Joe. It makes an improvement. If you're wondering, does it make an improvement? Yes. And actually, let's start to speak to some of the benefits here of the Woodwind. Versus any other pellet grill, this is the best one that I've used. And it's not an exhaustive list, but I've used a couple Traegers, so my Pro 575, Ironwood, Timberline, I've used Green Mountain grills, Broil King's pellet grill, as well as the Generation 1 Weber smoke fire. So I've had a couple experiences with a number of pellet grills, and this stands at the top of the pack. And so if you're looking for a pellet grill, I can already say 2 thumbs up. This is the best one that I've used. It has a lot of advantages. Where I start to get stuck is if you zoom out a little bit further, you look at the price point. I think this is around $1,400. Something like the Connected Joe is $1,600, or kind of less than that, something like the Masterbuilt Gravity series. There's other options. And so this brings us to a bit of a fork in the road in terms of what type of experience do you want, in terms of what grill might be right for you. So starting with the offset, and let's not forget here, something like the Oklahoma Joes is less than half the price and turned out a superior rib in terms of smoke quality, but it comes with the cost of needing to get splits, break them down, and interact with your fire every 20 to 30 minutes. My entire Saturday was spent on a very short leash with the Oklahoma Joes. I can get a longer leash with my larger offsets. I can get about an hour running a nice, almost flat line of 275 on something like my Smoke North Huron. But even with that, my distance of being able to go somewhere is limited to something like maybe cutting the grass. So if you want the live fire and the offset approach, while it's better in terms of absolute smoke quality, you cannot overlook here the cost of that in terms of what your day looks like. For me, I love it. This is absolutely, I'm okay with, and especially since the result I know is better, I have no problem making that choice. But I have many, many, many friends who are not okay making that choice, and they just want something that they can do repeatable without needing to commit their lives to fire management. And so all of a sudden now the cards start to come back to the Camp Chef Woodwind Pro here, having a number of advantages. While this is not necessarily as good as an offset rib, I'm gonna bet here, chances are, if you take, let's exclude the best of the best, like the Texas Monthly, top 50 list or something like that. But if you were just to say an average restaurant, North America, go in and buy some ribs, I'm gonna guess here this is better than 95% of them. This is really good. It's going to put you at the top of your neighborhood immediately. And if you're comparing against other pellet grills, it's better than all of them, and you don't have the cost of needing to dedicate your entire Saturday to running and interacting with your fire. So that I feel really good about, recommending it. Where I start to again now say that fork in the road in terms of, do you want to run your fire? Do you want to be hands off? If you choose run your fire, well, there's again options that make it a little bit easier. If you choose I want the hands off, a really great result without a lot of effort, there's another fork in the road that I'm running into here, which is this smart connected grill category is not just exclusive, to Camp Chef. I said earlier I wasn't going to compare it against the Masterbuilt because I thought it was too similar. I can't help but think we need to do this head to head now, because the Masterbuilt can do a couple things that the Camp Chef can't. I needed to rely on the sidekick in order to sear the steak. I turned it up as hot as it would go inside, and my cast iron would not get above 300 degrees. The Masterbuilt, I was able to get 700 degrees, no problem. The other thing I was able to do with the Masterbuilt is run a wood-only fire, and this came dangerously close to something like my Oklahoma Joes offset. I wouldn't put it up with sort of the bigger offsets, but it was darn close. It was really good, and I again was about every 45 minutes or so adding wood splits, which is the same 45 minutes or so that I needed to add wood here in order to get the best result. And again, for clarity, I did have this set to 10 for smoke. I added wood all the time, and I was running the damper a little bit more like my offset, where I was opening and closing that to make sure that we were burning a ton of wood. So this, I gave it the full beans to get maximum smoke. But again, zooming out in that hands-free category, there's other options. I think the Woodwind is around, $1,400, and so this opens up a couple other grills in that space. The Masterbuilt falls in there for about $1,600 US. the Kamado Joe, Connected Joe, falls in there. And that's where I can get the automated benefits. If I want to set it, forget it, walk away, I can also add wood chunks in the bottom drawer, just like I do here, and get the same result as I do on an analog Joe. But I have versatility, and versatility for me is king. I happen to be so fortunate to have more than one choice when it comes to now using a grill, but for a decade I didn't. I had just one grill, and I want that grill to be able to do many things: steak, chicken, pizza, ribs, brisket, you name it. I don't want to have a single purpose grill for absolutely everything. And the versatility here, the Camp Chef is falling a little bit into some of that one trick pony, and it does that trick exceptionally well. But at this price point, there are others that I think offer a little bit more versatility. So I said originally I wasn't going to compare it against the Masterbuilt. I can't help now imagining seeing how these two do side by side. So you're not relying on my memory of a couple of weeks or a month back. So make sure you've got the notification bell turned on, you're subscribed so you're alerted when that video comes out. But that's it for today. We've confirmed a couple things and introduced a few new questions. Is it the best pellet grill I've ever used? Yep, no problem saying that. Is it the best option in this smart connected grill category? I'm now not so sure. We've got a little bit more work to do. Until next time though, I'm James from Smokin' Dad Barbecue signing off. And remember, don't be afraid to fire it up.